Good evening. On behalf of Avid Learning, I would like to welcome you to Real Journalism, Then and Now, What It Means to Cover Bollywood. Babu Rao Patel once said that film journalism began in 1935 when he started Film India and not before that. From this point onwards, the film journalist's pen has wielded immense power. It has turned movies into blockbusters, has made or broken actors' careers, and has even garnered international acclaim for small independent films. Our discussion this evening will trace the course of Indian film journalism as it's taken over the years. Please join me in welcoming journalist, author, and founder-editor of The Wire, Siddharth Bhatia, and independent film critic, screenwriter and sports blogger, Rahul Desai, in conversation with film critic, columnist, and screenwriter Raja Sen. Our discussion today will be followed by the launch of Siddharth's new book titled The Patels of Film India, which is an important biographical archive on the pioneers of Indian film journalism. I'll turn it over to you.
Very much. Raja should be entering at this point, but there's a small presentation of a few visuals just to give you an idea of what is contained in this book. It's a book about couple which ran Film India, one of the most iconic film magazines, which began in 1935, went on till 1985. It changed its name in between. And we'll talk about how the book came about. But I just like to show a handful of images, because these images are what drew me to writing this book in the first place. And any of you, all of you, who are cinema buffs or even interested in what imagery was like in those days, film imagery, will be quite fascinated by some of these. They're all from the book, so I have not taken any from the massive collection that we built up over, in fact, it was an embarrassment of riches, what to put in, what not to put in. But I'll just show you, so please. Yeah. So that's the cover. Have a look at it. It's got the faces of all the big stars of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, up to the 50s. We took a conscious decision not to go beyond that in this cover. And you'll see, now the important thing to note is many of these covers are about films, they're ads. But the important thing to note is that they are, for the most part, hand-painted. And two things I like to always draw attention to. One is the quality of the hand painting. The second thing is the quality of the processing, because the tones that they have captured. Now look at Mother India, top third from left on top, just next to Raj Kapoor. If you look at Nargis, it's so beautifully painted and rendered, and how they must have then gone and processed it. So that, in fact, I found out the name of the blockmaker. The blockmaker in the first 20 years was a man called Didi Neroy. And Didi Neroy, actually his family is here somewhere, but they didn't know much about how the actual process was done. The printing was done by New Jack printers.
Okay.
There is a Jack printers around, but I'm not sure that they are connected. So I was fascinated. I'm not a printing technologist, but I was fascinated at the quality of the hand painting. Many of them done by the well-known painter from Karnataka, Mr. Pandit.
Right.
So that's the cover. And Daivat, our designer, who was harassed within an inch of his life by me and the publisher, has made this. And it was a really tough call what to include and what not to include. Next. So that's Mr. Babu Rao Patel and Mrs. Sushila Rani Patel, who died just a year ago, exactly a year ago, in fact, July last year. Wonderful woman. She was singing. She was a classical singer, actress, and so much more. In fact, her story is equally, if not more important in some respects than Babu Rao's. Yeah. So that's the one I was telling you about. Have a look at this. This is hand-painted, believe it or not. And the hand painting would have mattered very little had it not been processed and printed, block printed well. Yes, next. This is, again, if there's a printer here, it can tell me how they achieved this 2 and 3 tone kind of effect. Ashok Kumar in the heyday of his career, so perhaps the mid-40s.
This almost looks like it's a black and white picture that's been painted over or something.
But I'm not sure that is the case,
Right.
because then I looked at it, it's one of those black and white paint, but I'm not so sure about that because I've seen quite a few of those, but it well could be. This is perhaps a studio still.
Right.
Unlike the other one, which may have also come from the studio, but it was on the cover as an ad.
Okay.
So this must just have been a still that they gave.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Madhubala's first famous film, Tarana, with Dilip Kumar. Again, purely speaking as an image, the, rendering of one face very big, the other kind of covering all the things they teach you in photography of the rule of 3, etc., all seem to have been covered here. Next. So this is one of my absolute favorite images because it's really beautifully.
And we were talking about this just before the launch that Raj Kapoor has never
Without his
looked more like a woman. I mean, look at that. That does not look like a leading man in any way.
Yeah, without his earliest roles were without a mustache. That was very important. Interestingly, one of the things that you find out when you look at some of the old posters, not this one, but some of the old posters, is who gets first credit.
Right.
That's very important. So you find that certain stars did not get first credits even though they had a longer career.
Sure.
But at that moment, they were number 2 or 3.
Fair enough.
Go ahead. This is Nimmi. Again, this could be a hand-painted, a black and white painted over. So I've chosen to give some ads. Anyone remember these cars? They do? Who remembers these cars? This looks like a fairly young audience to me. So these are the early Fiats which came into the city. The one thing that really excited me about the first 20 years was the fonts.
Right.
So these are lovely Art Deco fonts if you look at them closely.
Yeah, it's very much the kind of stuff they did on Mad Men. It's that word.
That's right, yeah. Okay. So they were selling telephones. They were beseeching people to buy telephones. They were telling you the virtues of telephones. You can have a look at what that ad is saying. The Bombay Telephone Company Limited was a private sector company which said, please come and take our telephone connections. Almost like saying our internet connection is the best. So this is an ad I found for selling the telephone. Yeah. You can't read that, but that's Capstan, I think. How many people remember Capstan? Oh, you do. Okay. It was around till, a few years ago. Next. So being the Lux lady was the ultimate compliment for a film star. And I think the very first Lux lady is not in this particular presentation, but one of the oldest names which they used was Leela Chitnis.
Okay.
And she's there in this.
In the book.
Yeah, she's there in this. This is obviously the 60s or the late 50s because Vaida Rahman had made her debut in 1956. So this is perhaps a little later than that. So to be a Lux model was the ultimate for a film star at that time. Next. Okay, so here's a black and white ad for a film called Afsar, which has unfortunately vanished because the prints don't exist anymore. Navketan's first ever film. Yes? So these were his articles, and this is how he used to give headlines. Presents a stupid and boring story. No ambiguity. Absolutely no ambiguity. He has very, very, very rude things to say about some of the most classic films you can think of. We look at Pyasa and say, wow, right. And he said this is all rubbish. But stupid and boring is and idiotic were his 3 favorite words, which he mixed and matched for several films. Yeah. Mother India, but of course he could praise too, becomes the pride of India. Next. What is that?
Incurable headache.
It gives incurable headache. One of the things that Babu Rao did was to reply to questions that he got from readers. He got something like 5,000 to 7,000 letters a week, and from there they selected about 10 pages of questions, 10 printed pages, which could be anywhere up to about 500, and he replied to them. Some of his answers are quite
You do 10
clever.
pages of these questions.
He would print about 10 to 12 pages of these questions in every issue.
Okay, wow.
Yeah? And you could ask him anything. How's your married life? He would answer it. What do you think of Hindu philosophy? He would answer it.
That's true.
What do you think of Nehru and Gandhi? He would answer it. And in all these three examples I've given, and what do you think of this particular movie, of course, in all these four examples that I've given, each answer was ruder than the other.
Right.
So even about his personal life, the answer was quite rude. So that's it. So it's there in the book, just 12 or 15 images, many more in the book, and we'll discuss that. I'm glad to see a full house, Raja.
You know, when my first confession is that when I got through this book, it took me a long time to get to any of your stuff because of the excerpts and these images. They were all so fascinating. What drew you to this? Which was the first point when the Patels fascinated you?
So I had a vague idea about this magazine. Of course, by the time I got to know about it, maybe in the late 70s or early 80s or something, the name had already changed. It had become Mother India.
Right.
But one kind of vaguely knew. In 2009, 2010, I was researching for another book, and someone said that you might get some old reviews and cuttings and ads. When we do, researching, anyone who's written a book on current history will know that researching in this country is a nightmare. The establishment round the corner will not open its doors to you unless you are a staff member. Others, it's impossible to get. In any case, most publications did not cover things like popular culture, or it was politics and crime, when you really look back, or some, personalities and things. So someone told me about this, and I went and met Mrs. Patel. Mrs. Patel was one of those who believed a lot in lending her library to anybody who wanted. So there was always a long line of researchers at her library. Fascinating, huge library. She had 50 volumes or 50 years of this particular magazine. And I picked up about 2 ads or something. Of course, there's no question of asking for copyright or anything. She said, take whatever you want, very generously. Then after about a few months, we got to know each other, and she said, don't you think there's a book in this? And by, I started thinking of the same thing, and it took me about a year to get started. So only early 2012 really did I start thinking that there was a book. And then I talked to a publisher, and then we started work on it. And I saw it as 3 stories. I saw it a story about cinema, of course, but I saw a story about this really, prominent couple of the times who knew everybody knew them, and what their personal lives were like. And I saw it a story about how India was developing in the 30s and 40s, because there's a lot of that in the background.
Sure.
As you can see that there's partition going on, and there's, the British rule is ending. What happens around that time? Who are our leaders? What are they saying? All that appeared in this magazine. It's an alternative history about what we've been taught.
It's also remarkable because of how outspoken he is. When you said he was asked questions about Nehru or any of that, it's extremely irreverent, it's extremely tongue-in-cheek, it's also, biting in terms of satire or in terms... And he did this, he went to jail as well at some point, I think.
The jail thing was nothing to do with all that. The jail thing was, of course, because of the kind of... But that was the emergency. He went for about 6 days or 7 days. And he wrote a letter of apology.
But overall, he had been through all of this, through these times you're talking about, and yet there was the threat of censorship never loomed over him. Okay,
now I'm going to make one of those kind of there's general comments. I think we were a more liberal country at that time. Let me be honest. I think India was liberal, Indians were more liberal, our rulers were liberal, and many of the things that are in the air nowadays and which we talk about never struck us. So there was no question of any censorship.
Sure.
He was constantly being pulled up and, there was breach of privilege and he said all kinds of nasty things. But I can't imagine either Nehru or anybody else saying, stop writing this. Or him thinking I should stop writing this about Nehru. So in fact, even when Gandhiji passed away, his obit was not as effusive as many others. Think about it. Right. Can we do that today?
Yeah, which is what. Let me bring in Rahul at this point.
Someone who's grown up in the 90s.
But you have to contextualize Rahul.
I will contextualize Rahul. Rahul is writing for a website called Catch News, which is one of the new websites. But before that, he was writing for a publication called the Mumbai Mirror, which I used to write for at one point of time as well. Used to pride itself on being provocative. Rahul wrote a review for a film called Tanu Weds Manu Returns.
I'll never forget that.
And his most read review, I would imagine. And he gave it 2.5 stars. And the publication a couple of days later issued an apology for that review, saying that research has decided that it should be rated 3.5 stars, leading to Rahul's exit. So let me bring Rahul in on this point of...
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't fired, but it was a conscious decision. Yeah, I mean, even if you talk about the 2.5 star thing, and it's unfortunate to sort of be known only for this, as of this point. But I don't know. I mean, it raises the point about not only Mirror, a lot of publications these days, and I'm only talking about print publications. And especially hearing Siddharth talk about Baburao Patel and the kind of liberal sort of atmosphere journalism was a part of too. It's quite shocking for me right now sitting here and hearing and reading these things just before this started. That, a guy, and one thing to note is he was the editor of his own magazine.
Sure.
So it's very important that your editor, I mean, nowadays I don't think editors would be so hands-on or sort of sort of make up most of the content of the magazine. But it's very important that your own editor believes in the same stuff you do. So, and in print publications these days, it's inconceivable to think of this. The kind of answers I'm reading and the kind of stuff I've read about the 60s and 70s and the reviews I read back then, yeah, it's quite a revelation to me too. And I mean, I'm still coming to terms with it, especially after what happened. So, yeah.
Can I just say something? So it's not as if PR didn't exist. It's very important to know that PR did exist even at that time. And there were rumors about him that he printed good reviews only if he got an ad. But I have seen any number of cases where he's got an ad and he has lacerated the film.
Right.
Second, two of his best friends are Dilip Kumar and Mehboob Khan. He's hit out at them in print. And he's got an entire article that he wrote to say, if anyone can prove I'm a blackmailer, you can take away 500 rupees. So it's not as if it was all, wonderful at that time and all that. But it's a question of what you see in front of you. And what you're seeing in front of you is really sharp, incisive, brave, sometimes a little, ridiculously over the top. But writing that, nobody came and said to you, stop doing this, either from another floor or from outside.
What gave him this exalted position, though? There were so many publications at that time. I mean, he said, film journalism did not exist before his publication, but there were others, and there were others after, which overtook him as well. So what do you think gave him this kind of authority?
Well, it's just the kind of person he was, and it showed in this. He also, don't forget, I think there are instances in this about how he took on American film producers who were making what we would call today Orientalist films. So I don't know whether anyone of you have seen The Drum by Alexander Korda, very famous film, very, very exotic, the exotic East and all that. I think he has something about Sabu the Elephant Boy also. But basically, he was against that kind of exoticization. So That must have also made him popular. His greatest appeal lay in the fact that A, his readers loved him, and B, he loved them. So you could land up at his office in the morning and say, I have come from Hyderabad and I want to see you, and you could see him. That will never happen today. So if that was the kind of access people had to him, and his reputation grew and grew and grew. So you'll see letters from as far as Fiji, Durban, Pakistan, all over the place, people writing to say, and because they connected with him. And he said what they thought they were thinking. He said it.
It's often said, and I think it's a misconception today, but that critics can make or break careers or films or any of that. We can at most encourage, an unlikely film, champion it or something, but I don't think we can affect.
Well, that's for you guys to tell.
Some
I
blockbuster
think
juggernaut.
films can make or break critics these days, but it's the opposite these days. But it's also, it's down to a lot of, I have a feeling it was more of a first mover basis also then. Starting a film magazine back in 1935. See the scene right now, it's overcrowded. I'm sure you throw a stone, you'll find 10 bloggers. So
But that's what we're talking about, the fact that there were other publications at that time. When we say he would make or break careers, the fact that he would, write something scathing about a certain star, has he affected actual rises?
I don't think so, but he certainly tried to make a few careers.
Right.
His wife's first film was a smash hit, but the second wasn't, despite a lot of money being spent on it. So he couldn't, beyond a point, push that. It's not as if every reader of his went and saw the movie. Then there were this whole range of wannabes, actors and actresses who came. He tried to push them. They didn't go very far. So I don't think that one should look at it that way. But what one certainly could say is, because let's face it, if you read a bad review, chances are most people will say, I feel like seeing this movie, I will go. So that review will probably play on your mind, but you will go anyway. Which is why your case I find so ridiculous, because the movie was doing well anyway, by word of mouth. But what I think stands out is just candidness in saying what you want to say. Your job is not to make or break careers, but your job is to say, I think this is a rubbish film, I'm going to say. Mind you, it's not as though he was a great lover or appreciator of cinema. Often you'll find the camera work is rubbish, the music is awful.
Very dismissive.
Who is this blank looking man? That's Guru Dutt, by the way. Who's this wonderful phrase he's used? Who's this pigeon chested woman? I won't mention, she's there in the book. Who's this papaya face? So now
He spoke about V. Shantaram developing negroid characteristics.
So papaya face, potato, so and so heroine, again I don't know the name because it's all there, has been visiting the kitchen too often because she's put on some weight. So now that kind of thing, it's not cinematic appreciation. I look at it as a particular kind of, the candidness of saying it. And I'd always like to say, look at that and look at where we are.
Yeah, it's more of a representation of, nowadays if you meet a lot of current critics and all, you meet them before sort of a preview show and talk to them, and meet them after a preview. And maybe, give them a drink or two, and you'll probably know what, they really want to say. And what he wrote is basically what we talk about after, if we have to be brutally honest, in a room when we know there are no mics, when we know nobody's watching us. A lot of critics think that way. Obviously, as you said, there's no such freedom these days in print, especially. I can't even imagine it, because to be honest, I've only been here a few years. If you probably transcript a conversation, say between me, Raja, and a couple of other critics after a particularly bad film, which is basically 95% of the time these days, you'll probably come up with a lot of anecdotes like that too. we can be rude, we can be terrible, but nobody knows about it because we are probably trained to not probably voice the way we want to put across things, the way we'd like to. And that's how, at least from a modern perspective, that's how I see it
Can I
now.
ask a question? Sure. So now this is a question because I don't practice film journalism at all, but this is a question as a reader. Are you saying self-censorship? Because that's what the message.
Yeah, after a while it tends to become like that because, for example, if you're writing a review like that, say a couple of times, and you're apt maybe by your editor or maybe by external forces, which tends to happen quite a bit these days. If it happens more than a couple of times, you yourself start putting this inbuilt mechanism, say, I don't want to go through this nonsense again, so maybe I should just be a little more forgiving in my next review. Or maybe I shouldn't use those same phrases or not maybe get personal. And we do love to get personal. It's just that the people who read it, some of them are mature enough to understand it. Some of them and a majority aren't within the film industry. So that self-censorship is beginning to happen. And that's why you are seeing a falling sort of... And I was thinking about it on the way here too. The way... There's a very mistaken perception these days that honest critiques are good critiques, you know. I'd imagine honesty is the minimum sort of thing you are supposed to, it's the minimum, it's a minimum requirement as a journalist or a critic. So nowadays we've reached a stage where a reader, if he sees a very extreme review in print, he'll be like, "Arey, kya likha hai? It's such a scathing review, is a great critic." They don't go deeper than that. They are not going to go about what he wrote. As long as he sees that, you know, a critique is trying to be honest, that's good enough for readers nowadays.
I'm a little appalled, I'll just say, you know, I've been in this a little longer than you have, you know, and I think this whole idea of self-censorship it's very important to combat that. I think we've, you know, when I started reading Mr. Patel's work, you know, I'm someone who's been called up by directors in the middle of the night or gotten threats from producers or have made actresses cry. And it's one of those things I felt validated, you know, by this man who was, you know, writing this stuff with what Manto called this tough guy assertiveness. And I think it's important to not lose your voice in the, you know, I mean, you want to be correct. I don't think you should go out and blast someone for the heck of it, but if you can't back it up with, you know, why you're doing that, but you have to, I think it's imperative that you can't stop, you know, you can't worry about what everyone else is going to say.
No, I totally agree. I mean, if I was still writing in print, I would have probably gone the dark side.
But that's not the dark side. That's what I'm saying.
It shouldn't be,
right?
You know, but that's how it is. Like if I had accepted that and gone on to write reviews after that day, you know what I stood for after that, you know. Sure. So, and the self-censorship, I mean, you keep assuming, I mean, you think one review I'm particularly liberal towards a certain filmmaker, and I can't blame you for doubting my integrity after that. So that's the point. You have to make a stand, and in these cases, unfortunately, it required me to leave. Yeah, so sort of, if that's making a stand, leaving what you really love doing.
Now that you're writing for a website, an independent voice, I think you should not.
Yeah, a lot more freedom.
Avoid
like,
digitally. Phrases.
Yeah, digitally, I'm totally open.
Well, let's also look at several other things that are beginning to happen in the journalism domain. One is, of course, this chilling effect that you're talking about. Who's going to take a hassle with advertisers? Who's going to take a hassle with... sorry, can you? Better? So who's going to take, get into panga with advertisers or the marketing director or my editor or the owner? So that's one part of it. The other is, and it flows over to other forms of journalism, which is, say, for the sake of argument, business journalism or political journalism, you know. You're going to get a phone call or your bosses are going to get a phone call and all. So the way it works, and this is the advantage of being a grizzled veteran, the way it works is, after a while, as you said, but it's a little more sinister than that, you start reframing what you were going to say, and you start when you look back, you realize that the reframing has actually become positive when you wanted to say it's entirely different thing. It's not a question of euphemisms anymore. It is a question of actually going that one step further and saying this is good. And this happens in a very sinister, insidious way. If this is what we are talking about, what journalism is, and make sure it's going to come to digital also, there's no reason. And one of the reasons is, of course, that newspaper groups and media groups have so many other interests. So if the film editor is going to be told, please go and call such and such star for our event, where is the question of having independent writing? So I'm presuming that that's what's beginning to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's the fear. I don't think it's really spilt over to that extent. I mean, I think, thankfully, I think your example is a more isolated example. We haven't seen it happen much, we've seen.
So I'll give you a small story from this. So Mehboob Khan, who made Mother India, was one of his closest friends. Okay. Now, we are only talking in terms of what we know, in terms of the book, in terms of what we have received. But Mehboob Khan was one of his closest friends. Mehboob Khan, around the late 1940s, a lot of people from Bombay and the film industry said, let's cross over, because that's where it's going to be. And the film industry honchos, many of them, felt that if they went over there in a country where there was zero film industry, they would get a lot of assistance from the government. Many of them went there and within the next few months wanted to return. I mean, Manto is a classic example. He got thrown into jail and things like that. So Mehboob Khan came back. Meanwhile, the government of Bombay had already gone and taken his property.
Okay.
So say, sorry, so what is the Evacuee Act or Enemy Act or something like that? And they'd taken his property, and he went to Babu Rao and said, look, my property is gone. Babu Rao made a call or two, talked to some people, talked to the government, and the chief minister of Bombay in those days was Morarji Desai. Talked to him, talked to others. Not only got back the property, but everything around Mehboob's studio is residential except that. So he ensured that the commercial, it would remain commercial. So he managed to swing that. Okay? So let's say he helped a friend or whatever. A lot of the films after that of Mehboob Khan, he has scathingly attacked. So he was his closest friend, he helped him, but when it came to writing, he attacked. He's attacked Dilip Kumar. There are 2 or 3 stories about Dilip Kumar in this which are priceless. About this young callow man coming to this powerful editor and saying, please help me I'm having some problem with some woman and her husband and her brother or whatever. So wonderful stories. And the point is not that he was a hero. I presume others did the same thing. Wrote what they wanted to, and they had friends in the film industry. So it's not as if conflict of interest can't arise.
Sure.
It's a question of youth saying, this is what I do and this is how I'll do it. That's it. So when we say today, which person sitting in this room or anywhere else believes in those stars, tell me honestly, which you read in the morning on Friday? Nobody believes in them. Everything's got a 4-star. So it's already a mug's game.
Right.
So, and now with internet, Twitter, social media, it's a word of mouth also makes a huge difference. So I don't know whether it makes a difference at all. Whether you say 3 stars of...
No, because there's so many publications, like Rahul said now, that no matter how bad your film is or how panned it is, you will find some radio jockey that's giving it 5 stars because they want to see their name on a hoarding. Okay. So that's what it comes down to.
So this is
the hoarding thing is important.
It's true.
Yeah, like most mainstream, I mean, you're called a mainstream reviewer if you use stars to rate a film nowadays. But yeah, most of it, I'm guessing most of the time that's the intention, at least from what he mentioned, RJs and maybe some obscure publications or trade magazines posing as film criticism as such. That those lines are very, I mean, there is no balance anymore. A lot of our trade analysts are known as film reviewers and possibly the most popular film reviewers in this country. which is really wrong. They're two different professions. They shouldn't be mistaken one for the other. Obviously, stars is a very reductive way. If you see it in the West or see it anywhere else, they use adjectives on film posters sometimes. Sometimes they use stars.
But that's a mess as well, because the whole thing about the Western adjectives, that the blurbs they use are often completely out of context. Someone saying this could have been a magnificent film and it just says magnificent, so it's just...
Yeah, it reminds me that
Sony made up a critic a couple of years ago. Sony was in a scandal because they invented a critic just for blurbs, So nothing really happens out of this. No one really cares. The reader doesn't care.
Can I just read one paragraph?
Please.
One paragraph.
Please.
I think all those who like to read newspapers on Friday morning to find out what a film is like. I'll have to look for it. You continue.
See, while you find that, one of the things I was discussing with Rahul earlier is that, these films that are discussed in this book, they're such holy cows of our cinema, Kagaz Ke Phool and the like. And it's so refreshing to see this take, which is like an authentic take from back then when they weren't canonized the way they are now. So, who knows, maybe 50 odd years from now we'll be talking about our dabangs the same way,
Action Jackson.
They'll be looked on the same way as, Ajay Devgan will be Manoj Kumar, 50 years later.
Yeah.
Or Bombay Velvet will be the best film ever made.
It'll take more than 50 years for that.
Okay, so here's something that I'd just like to read, and I will not make any comment on it, I'll just read it. It's just a paragraph. Yet there was a difference in styles between Patel and Abbas. Abbas is K. Abbas, Khwaja Ahmad Abbas, and for that matter, critics from other publications. Patel stood apart from all of them. A journalist, Jamil Ansari, analyzed them in the magazine, in the Film India. Baburao Patel, if his pistol misses the target, he knocks you down with the butt end of it. So, no ambiguity how he operated. K. Abbas never commits himself even to himself, which I think is a really good line. Miss Claire Mendonça. Now, she was, Miss Claire Mendonça was the most famous critic of the time because she reviewed for Times of India. In fact, the Filmfare Awards were known as the Claires for many years. Studio publicity officer's dream come true. After that, I don't know what one can say, because we are talking about 45, 50, 60 years ago. If the Times of India critic at that time was studio officers, publicity officers' dream come true, well, things haven't changed that much.
No comments there.
I think we should refrain. But what's very interesting is when you read his work, a lot of times, like I was reading the review for Anand, when he likes the film, there's no, dismissively discussed even the fact that he says Rajesh Khanna is good in the part and that the supporting cast is adequate. He doesn't feel the need to name check a certain nobody at that time, because I think even for him, I guess it's coming from a position of such pomposity perhaps, that who is this person that he needs to mention? He will only, even his pot shots have to be earned, I think.
Yeah. I think also by then he was also a little out of it by the time Anand came out. What was it, 73 or thereabouts? So he was a little out of it. But even earlier when you see so-and-so is adequate, in CID, which is absolutely one of our favorite films, he says Dilip Kumar does not look like, he looks like a woman or something like that. Now he just says it. More than the film reviews, I would also like readers to look at some of the political writing, because he was he was an early votary of the Hindutva line, and so a lot of that spills over into this. And it's interesting to see how Hindutva was playing out at that time, because there were none of these organizations, but there was the Hindu Mahasabha, and he was the candidate supported by the Jan Sangh. And he is scathing about them, saying that all they're cowards and all they're interested in is money. So these are the things that you would not find anyone. But he's a candidate. So he's seeing how they're operating and he's writing about that in his magazine. My point is, if any of us had a magazine today, would we be so bold and out there and care two hoots about advertising? I'm not so sure.
No, it is frightening. I think, but one of the things today that I see in a lot of the young critics, a lot of these young, mostly boys actually, but a lot of these young boys who become critics now, they're coming from bloggers and the blogs, and they're trying to provoke too hard. There's a lot of name calling, there's a lot of this is shit, this is the unprintable adjectives, all of that. It's just coming into like this almost scatological reviewing that doesn't seem to be able to back it up, and I think that's also a problem.
Is that
right?
cool?
I think they're trying to be cool. They're trying too hard to be cool, but I think it's important to have a certain level of consistency, which is what you see with this work.
Rahul, after you left, I mean, of course, for better or for worse, that will remain one of your great achievements or millstones, whichever way you want to look at it. After you left, the people who you are writing for or others you went to, did you sense that you would be viewed as a potential troublemaker?
Yeah, that sort of stuck with me after that, because at least as far as the one thing I saw is, as far as the mainstream publications were concerned, there was a lot of hesitancy, because unfortunately it became sort of a reputation, because I was known to be, as I said, honest, and many mistook that to be like good criticism. But anyway, I was, even before this happened, I was already known to be that, and Mirror has that reputation of sort of being one of the more honest and liberal papers, of our time, until that happened. So even if I had left, even if this hadn't happened and I had gone on to apply somewhere else, I think they'd have still looked at me with a certain kind of, let him write online karke, something like that. Keep him out of mainstream publications where, ads appear in the same papers, where...
What's the difference
between?
online and print?
I mean, at least from my experience, online you tend to get, I don't know, you tend to get far more freedom, at least as far as independent reviewing is concerned. See, for example, I've been a freelancer all my life. I have not really gone to an office. So, I mean, I could have said that if I was actually working in the Mirror office, things would have panned out differently. But as a freelancer, you tend to not know what's happening behind the scenes, how political it can get, how murky it can get. As you said, it does get very sinister. Only editors know about that most of the time. Obviously, it depends on how much your editor backs you too.
I can assure you, often editors also don't know. I mean, having been one, because these things work in very mysterious ways, and something happens, and like in your case, the star rating has to be changed. It could have been something very simple and something very complex. So, these very, very difficult to actually pinpoint. I mean, not in this particular case. I'm just saying that too many now interferences. The church and state divide is also over, more or less. So what you're seeing in film reviewing is just one aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah, I think what he's brought to the fore is quite frightening, though, because the Mirror, as he said, like a few years ago, I started a column for the Mirror about 4 or 5 years ago, and I remember I was, a troublemaker in your words in that sense, because I was shocked by the first page they had written. They said, "Contrarian critic Raja Sen writes a column now." I was just like, they wanted that. Every few weeks I would get a thing saying, "Why aren't you raising up more of a ruckus?" And there was enough to raise a ruckus about. But the fact that that sort of a paper has become something like this today is frightening. It's like, it is that talk of liberality. I think overall we're being pressured.
I mean, I won't generalize with everything about that paper, but the one thing which is what happened with that, and that example should serve as a reminder, is that film reviewing in general in print these days, I don't know about the other cities. I think Delhi has a few publications which tends to be quite out there, but at least as far as Bombay print publications are concerned, I don't think film reviewing is given the sort of importance it used to be given at one point of time, like from what I'm seeing. It's not looked at as an independent...
Well, even in the 80s, 70s, 80s, I mean, Khalid wrote whatever.
Exactly.
You know, and I'm mentioning Khalid because he was from the same stable.
Right. But down the line, I'm assuming as I once wrote, it's just become part of publicity of a film these days. People don't wait till Sundays like they used to read reviews. The reviews come out on Friday itself now. And reviews come out on Friday because it's as good as a poster nowadays. You know, it's because they want to put the stars on the poster soon enough. And they need important names for that. So as far as print publications are concerned, and I can say this with some kind of confidence, reviewing is not really an art anymore. It's just part of the entertainment section. You know, anyone can do it. And you will, if you look at the reviews
like
nowadays. Well, yeah. If you look at the reviews nowadays in newspapers, you'll notice the falling standards. You'll notice that it doesn't tell you anything.
I was going to say, please don't disillusion them, except that they are already pretty savvy about what goes on in the paper.
Mumbai Mirror reviewed the stock yesterday and put it as a master 10.
And they didn't put my name.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, I'm not being petty about that. But, I mean, I saw that. It just it was quite surprising. Sorry? Yeah, the stars thing that you're saying, I mean, I actually wrote an article after resigning for Scroll, I think, about how stars are sort of ruining the whole system and how reductive it is. But on one hand, you know, it works. Stars work for some people who just don't want to read reviews. A lot of people don't have the time to go through a whole review, unfortunately for us. So they'll just look at the byline or the stars at the top. You know, for me, I'd rather use a headline, you know, instead of the stars and stuff like that, which is why I've sought out a publication that doesn't use stars now. It's digital, it's, you know.
That's why this is all the more entertaining, because if you, and perhaps a little more forceful, because if you say, what a stupid and idiotic film, who cares about what's written?
Who cares about the stars then? It's pretty...
But tell me, what about, where was film journalism in the context of mainstream journalism at the time? Like, you know,
That's actually quite a good question now, because that applies to not only just film journalism, but also to things like popular culture.
Right.
Because when, you know, another book that I worked on, India Psychedelic, I don't know, I couldn't find anything on youth culture in the mainstream media. So the mainstream media, even if they had something on cinema, just tucked it away somewhere. The papers of the 50s, 60s, 70s were only obsessed with two or three things. One was politics. One was, you know, the great events. So, you know, Prime Minister making some great, that's also politics, but that kind of thing. Local stories, hyper-local stories, so say crime or whatever. And that's about it. Sport. No business. So there was hardly any business. The Times of India in those days had half a page or something. And when Economic Times started, they cut even that because they didn't want to. So, but business was not covered. But what they did have were reviews of high culture. Okay. So there was a Bharatnatyam performance. There was Nissim reviewing art. There was somebody reviewing good Marathi theatre, that kind of thing. This was lowbrow. Right. So there was a film review, but it was just put away. And in the 70s, you had critics, and the review appeared on Sunday. But that was just by the way. There was not much coverage in the big papers about anything which was popular.
do you think we'd have been better off, just hypothetically, if we stayed tucked away and were given the freedom to do what we want to do, as opposed to being brought front and center, breaking news headlines?
In what way?
In terms of film journalism right now.
Well, now you can't help it, because the number of media outlets have grown. So there's competition in that sense.
Right.
And it's an attention grabber, therefore revenue generator. and therefore has offline activities like you have these dramas, these award shows and all that, and then the television picks up the award shows and makes money out of that. So it's now a nice, comfortable, vicious circle. And I'm sorry to say that film critics are a very tiny part of the whole machine. So
we discovered that.
But you were talking about how after Filmfare came in, that was the big competitor. That was what
1954, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
20 years into Film India.
Yes.
And how did that change the landscape? How did that?
Well, it was from a big stable.
Sure.
It was launched by perhaps the most powerful publisher of the time, J.C. Jain. It was glossy. It had a marketing machine behind it. And there were a few attempts before that. I think Rusi had started a film magazine which collapsed. Burjor, Karanja, which collapsed. And then Filmfare came. It took off. Filmfare was all about very cozy coverage. Let's spend a day at home with Dilip Kumar. So all nicely photographed, beautifully done, and everyone sitting there and saying, this is his favorite shirt, this is that his dog, etc. I think a single man running this had no competition. And by then, I think towards the late 50s, he was also getting interested in politics. So things changed and Filmfare became the number one. And Filmfare was never challenged till Stardust came on the scene. And by the way, Filmfare had very, very, very weak gossip, very weak gossip. It had just had absolutely nothing that would offend.
It was a soft publication.
If journalism does not offend, something is wrong with journalism. That's my take on it.
We are both critics, but you as an observer, over the last few years, over the last, say, 20 odd years, how have you seen the face of criticism change in this country?
Well, I would like to broaden this, and I've been trying to do that, is to say that the face of journalism has changed substantially. Film journalism is part of it. Film journalism is very important, I think, because it touches a lot more people in many ways. Practically, people like to go and see a movie on the recommendation of a critic. Journalism has changed. Perhaps Asad will have another session on journalism. But most of the change, most of it is not good, because I think the clammy hand of other forces has begun to come in. And till the other day, we used to think very comfortably, oh, it's just the marketing department, it's just the advertisers, etc. It's just the corporates, and we'll fight them, and who cares for them and all. But once you let in all that, then other forces follow, and you can see those forces are following it.
Do you mean more recently?
In the last, actually, I would say in the last few years. For example, also, you write something in the Left-Handed Association of Santa Cruz will say you've insulted left-handers of Santa Cruz.
So taking offense thing.
Taking offense. And if you cannot stand up and say that it's my right to give offense and your right to do something about it, but not stop me, nothing is it. So I've been seeing for the last few days, in fact, I was reading about Salman Khan's tweet. What is he said that is offensive? Maybe he is stupid, but so what? Surely we have a right to do that. To say now that his bail should be withdrawn, that it should be thrown in jail, and Pakistan jao and all that. So it's our fault we have allowed that to come in. And, I can give chapter and verse on how journalism has changed, but mostly from my point of view for the worse.
All right, on that bleak note, I think we should open it up to questions if anyone has anything to ask.
I have one question. Here is a man who makes a movie, right? He spends 2-3 years, I don't think I need such a powerful voice. Here is a man who makes a movie, he spends 2-3 years researching it. He gets hold of a lot of professionals, a songwriter, an art director, a cameraman, music director. He puts it all together. And then he releases the movie on Thursday night for the press review. Now here is a young man or woman who comes and destroys it. What training has he done to become a single person to comment on art, music, songs, acting? What is it? How did he become that all-powerful God?
I don't think it's all powerful, but I like the sentiment. I think the fact is that whoever has made the movie, and I appreciate the effort and the manpower involved, I think we all do, it's very hard. But that automatically doesn't give them license to, like, it's, people are going in, people are spending their money on this film. People, once something is out there, be it a book, a piece of art, a film, an opinion has to be out there as well. And
You missed my question.
Right.
My question is that the opinion maker, what is the training that he has received? Or the
Right. So,
what is his capability to write that opinion?
absolutely, sir. But what, by that very measure, are we allowing people to direct films based on their qualifications? We are not. Are we, half the films made these days, are we looking at who's writing them based on qualifications? We are not.
The other half which are very good.
And which we are calling very good. I think the fact is that with a critic, as with any publication, unless the critic is bringing something to the table, they will not be able to have a prolonged career. They will not be able to enjoy any position of authority. You'll read a critic, you'll see that this person is saying something stupid. You will not take it seriously. You will go ahead and watch the film anyway. So I think a critic earns his credibility over a period of time with some consistency, with some, it's not just opinion, it is informative opinion. And if he can do that, then well and good. That's it.
Mr. Sen,
Right.
see, I also watch movies.
Right.
Sometimes it's also your state of mind.
Sure.
So if you are, in a good state of mind, you like a movie. And same thing, if you're not in a good state of mind. So how do we come to know that whether you were in a good state of mind that Thursday evening because the director wished you and put your hand next to you and offered you a drink or said that, why don't we go out and things like that.
Okay.
So that's the thing which audience we say, ye khud to nahi bika hua hai.
I'll tell you what. First of all, the second part of your question, it's the scariest thing for a critic to hang around with the director just before watching his movie or just after, because that's when we feign to get a phone call and run out of there, because we can't even lie to their face. They'll see it in print the next day. I think it's not, your question is right. You could be in a really bad mood. It could come out on the film technically, but film is a stronger medium than that, I'd like to believe. I'd like to believe if I'm in a bad mood and I watch a good film, it should lift my mood. It should take me out of that funk and make me feel better about everything. There's so many times we watch, the great films we watch or we appreciate, we really celebrate are films that will work on you no matter what. Which are films that really, it's not like grading a question paper. It's not that.
Can I ask one thing? Before you start actually making judgments, have you seen 100,000 movies to start making a judgment that this is good and bad? So this is a question to you personally.
I think
before you started making a judgment, did you see 1,000 movies to say this movie is good and or you just started after?
No, you have to. See, it's a very masochistic profession, because there are 5 good Hindi movies made a year, and we watch about 150 of them. So we are watching these really bad movies you haven't heard of, and we are watching them day in, day out, right? So if we didn't love the movies, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. Criticism is not a very highly paid job. It is not a glamorous job. This is not the time of the Patels. We are not making or breaking careers or marrying actresses. It's not happening. What's happening is that we can just be honest and we can try and, I think any critic, if they aren't providing reasons for their opinion, if they aren't informing it, then they aren't taken seriously anymore. And some of us are by some people and some of us aren't by many people. So you find your audience.
I sympathize for you and all the best.
Thank you.
Hi, my question is, how do you see the next 5 years in real journalism? Apart from being, my question is to you, Rahul, because since you mentioned it is more of an entertainment, that I agree personally. And how do you see the next 5 years, apart from being it as a commercial angle and entertainment angle, how do you see yourself or maybe the real journalism in the next 5 years? What will happen? I understood the trends and what has happened in the past, but I'm really eager to know what will happen, say, based on your perspective.
Well, I can only speak from purely from a film criticism sort of perspective, because I'm not a journalist in any other sense. I only review films. As he said, I don't know. For the next couple of years, I don't want to sound bleak, but for example, a lot of reviewers that are out right now, a lot of reviewers you've heard of, are not necessarily the best reviewers in our country. They are the most mainstream reviewers in our country. They have more exposure than others. A lot of young journalists are coming up these days, and this is where I'm bringing up a little bit of sunshine, into this whole thing. There are a lot of young journalists. I tend to, and unfortunately or fortunately, most of them are writing for digital publications, not print. Otherwise, you would know by now. They are actually, a lot of them are far more interesting only from a reading perspective to sort of read as far as film criticism is concerned, because they bring a very different sensibility to the table. They are not reviewers who have watched 1,000 films. They aren't reviewers who've gone 10 years and gone through hell. Like,
They are storytellers?
they are quite lyrical. But the thing is, a lot of reviewers are looking, at least the younger reviewers, including me, are looking towards the West as far as the standards of film criticism are concerned, as far as writing about films are concerned. We tend to get a lot more introspective about films now. We try to introduce that style. You will not be aware of it because most of it is for some obscure website. The best reviewers in our country, you have not heard their names. I mean, I don't know if many people have heard of Badwar Rangan or, Jai Arjun Singh, Tanul Thakur, a lot of people. Rangan and all, they are the senior reviewers, but there are few younger reviewers who I have a lot of faith in. I try to learn from them. I'm young myself, honestly. But no, I see if these reviewers somehow find a way to come to the fore, especially people like the ones I mentioned, I think criticism will be in a good space. But as of now, all of us are sort of languishing behind, and I meet these reviewers, these young ones I'm talking about, I meet them after movies every week nowadays. And we tend to hit the nearest pub and talk about how bad journalism is right now. And that's not the state you want to be in. We, of course, go home and write reviews the way we do. We put a lot of effort and thought into it. But if you've reached that stage right now, especially as a 28, 29-year-old like me, it's not a good space to be in. I just hope we find a sort of medium, a sort of voice. And if we do, I think you all will be assured of more independent voices or more, quality is subjective, but far more informed voices in the future.
First of all, thank you for putting together this session. My question is to Mr. Sen here. We all spoke about the fact that nobody goes, or on a Sunday nobody is waiting for a review. Earlier it used to be an influence. People used to be waiting for the review to come out. These days there's this worrying trend of reviewing trailers. Forget the film. Is that more of a pressure tactics from, say, maybe the website or print publication to, is that where the whole influence thing starts? You start reviewing a trailer and, you put a thought in the reader's mind that, maybe, this is good, this is bad. Like, for instance, these days there are a lot of, you've written a couple of trailer review yourself, right. The recent one being the Bond trailer. How important are those in terms of, sending out a message or influencing? Is that the objective at all? Or what's the whole point behind reviewing trailers?
Right. It's a good question. No. It's a good question. I get you exactly. See, I think the point is that we write about what is being spoken about. There was a time when a film would come out, there would be a couple of songs, there would be a trailer, it would release, Now, trailer launches have become a thing. They're synchronized around the world. They happen in the theater. There'll be a big event. Karan Johar will be standing and welcoming you. It's all to sell a trailer. Yeah, poster launch, trailer, teaser trailer launch. It's for a 5-second thing if you travel an hour and a half. Now, the point is that this is being done, right? This is how things are being sold. And it's not just here. It's out in the West as well. Your X-Men will come out. They'll release stills of it every other week. All of that. Very exciting right now. I think, especially we were discussing it a little while before the conversation, that the young Marathi filmmakers right now, I think, are the most exciting bunch. You know, they're doing some really thrilling work. A film called Killa, very recently, by this young cinematographer called Avinash Arun, is the most extraordinary Indian film I've seen in the last year. And I think that's where criticism kind of has a bigger voice, because these are the films that don't get noticed, or these are the films that tend to slip under the radar because they don't have the kind of publicity budgets that the big films do. So that's when these are films we can champion, these are films we can try and push and, you know, under our own steam and try and get more and more people to go and see them. But films, you know, we can celebrate the kind of cinema that we feel is actually making an impact or deserves an impact. And that's when I think the critic can kick in more than I don't think we can affect the box office of the next Salman Khan film, but for a small film, I think we can maybe give it a boost.
Like, I wouldn't be here then today. I would still be working there. No, I mean, you know, research and whatever the term they use, it is euphemism for something else. It's not research. It's not. Nobody has any qualification to do research there except me. That's the whole thing. So obviously, if I'd overrated the film, everyone would have been happy, and it would have happened in the next film. You know. The thing is, I mean, a lot of publications, as even Siddharth pointed out earlier, a lot of publications have different interests, field of interest too nowadays. You know, those can involve films too. So the thing is, when they get into various fields like that, a film critic, a reviewer, a film journalist is the first to bear the brunt of it. Because especially freelancers who are not really in that office, who don't know what's going on, you tend to expect calls on Friday morning saying, you know, this thing. So obviously, I mean, I'd not like to paint a totally sinister picture here, but then that is happening, and if that hadn't happened that day, it would have happened maybe 2 weeks down the line with a Times Group film called Dil Dhadakne Do. So the thing is, it was a Times Group film, and it would have happened. So if I had to give my honest views on that film, even if it were not up to the standards of what they wanted to, this would have happened 2 weeks later. The thing is, a lot of people didn't know it was a Times Group film. A lot of people will not know that they will come out with new films. So other publications may, and the precedent that was set there, a lot of publications may think it's totally cool to do that after this. And that's what's disturbing for the younger critics like me, because we are the first to fall. We don't have our beards and our white hair, you know, telling people of our...
Talk about an attack. Where did that come from?
I mean, I don't have experience written on my face.
Okay.
So, yeah, so that's the thing.
Okay, we'll talk about that a little later. But I must tell you, when you mentioned that the Times Group made that film, I don't know whether they declared it or whether there was an open declaration of conflict of interest or even something in the bracket. No, it says Dil Dhadakne Do. So, after writing nasty reviews for many years, Baburao Patel decided to make a film with his young girlfriend, who became his wife. And he made a film called, he made two films. One was Draupadi, one was Gwalan. And both the films were very lavishly mounted. And incidentally, I have some stills here of Gwalan. It's got choreography by Ram Gopal. I don't know how many of you are aware of Ram Gopal. You are. Ram Gopal was India's finest dance export. Then, now. I mean, he was a master. We know of Uday Shankar, but this man was several steps ahead. So Ram Gopal did the sets are outstanding. So when he made the first film, Draupadi, he wanted to present it. He knew that everybody out there was going to be scathing about it. He also knew that he couldn't review his own film. He was giving a lot of publicity, but he couldn't review it. So he had a lot of enemies in journalism. One of them was B.G. Horniman, who used to run Bombay Chronicle. So he called B.G. Horniman and said, look, we are enemies. Why don't you review this film for me? Horniman was caught. Right. So he's written and he didn't know anything about films. So he's written a review which basically skirts around and says things like, excellent, fantastic, this, but nothing about the movie. Because he doesn't know anything about the movie. So there are ways to skirt around it and to call for an outside. But that requires a certain sense of confidence. Because Abbas writes in this that, I wrote a lot against Babu Rao, but Babu Rao gave me a lot of writing opportunities. That requires a little bit of confidence.
It's important that if you dish it out, you should be able to take it on the chin. I mean, I acted in a little film a few years ago, and because Rediff had to review it, and I couldn't possibly do it myself, I asked Karan Johar to review it, whose films I was particularly cruel to the year before. And I asked Karan to come in and write a review, and Karan was very excited. And Karan finally complained that he said there was not enough bad stuff to say about you, because he actually ended up liking the film. But the point is, give it out there. I think I think you're screenwriting as well now. And I have a film coming out in a couple of months, and I know it's going to get really bad reviews for various reasons, besides the fact that it could be a lousy film. But I think we should be prepared to take it. If it's honest, take it.
Where's the integrity in all this? We're talking about...
That's what we
This is what I'm saying. Eventually, don't you have to be true to yourself?
How else do you get sleep at night, right?
Yeah, well, you need people to believe in you too, the ones you're answerable to at office.
Yeah, I'm an outsider to all of this. In Hollywood, there's a lot of people would look to the 1970s as a kind of golden era of filmmaking, the sort of era of Coppola and Apocalypse Now, that sort of time. I wondered, as you looked back, if there was a similar moment that you might look to in Bollywood, or to put the question the other way around, is there any meaningful way in which you can say that the films that are produced today are better or worse than they used to be, for whatever reason, whether because, I don't know, multiplex audiences and that kind of thing? I mean, are things getting better or worse? I'm guessing Sid's going to say they're getting worse because he's an old pessimist. But
So I think better or worse about where you are today is best answered 20 years down the line, because we tend to look back with a sense of nostalgia, and a lot of rubbish was made in the 50s and 60s, but we still call it the golden age of Hindi cinema, because the standouts are fantastic. At the moment, from what little I know, and they could elaborate, some really exciting work is going on. Whether this has the potential to stay with us over the next 15 or 20 years and be path-breaking, we'll know only later. That was better, today is not better, I don't fall into that. But I would certainly say the golden age, by most people would say it's the 50s and 60s. I particularly think, I believe in that. I particularly think that today's music is something I just cannot relate to, but there are some great movies being made at the moment. You've got the advantage of looking back, and maybe
Yeah, I think it's actually, I'm less optimistic about the new wave, so to speak, because I think we've always had a certain parallel cinema going on, the 70s and 80s particularly with Mr. Benegal and that whole wave. I think that was very effective Hindi cinema. I feel that it's a cycle, it's a cycle. We see some progressive cinema being made, and then some blockbusters come along and kind of ruin everything by setting up. It's a very herd mentality that we see put in motion. But looking back, the golden age thing is very tricky. It's a trap, because you start, like we said, canonizing films that then weren't as important or weren't as revered. But we look at it now. I mean, even in Hollywood, when we look at retrospectively, we say, 1987 was a great year because it had these 30 great films. And you can do that for any year now. But you look back and it wasn't necessarily a movement. And I think that's the same thing here. I think the only thing is production values have gone up. There's a lot of exposure to foreign cinema, and I think filmmakers are being bred on a lot of and a lot of very international, very cutting-edge cinema, and they're coming in with that sensibility right from the beginning. But I don't think it's necessarily any better. Yes, sir. Right. Right. No, I think this whole sequel thing is a big problem. It's all over the world now. Everyone is mining anything from old TV shows to books to comic books. Everything is a sequel. Everything is thought about, 5 movies in advance, 10 movies in advance. And I think it's a problem. When you see these films now, a predictability kind of sets in. That said, one of the most exciting times I've had at the movies this year was with this English film called Mad Max Fury Road, directed by a 70-year-old man who was making a sequel to his film after like about 25 years. And it's amazing, it's amazing because there's some vitality to it. So I think there is room for originality, but the sequels are a problem. The whole idea of a sequel is essentially trying to milk something that's already succeeded and trying to push it forward, and it's a problem. None of the Hindi film sequels are any good because they've not been conceived as sequels when they've made
they aren't even related to each other most
completely.
of the time.
I like Fast and Furious.
Fast 7?
I was just going to say, I have 15 and a half.
They're making another Rocky, which is actually looking really good. But Filmfare is still there. and Filmfare is still around and going strong and still as cozy and occasionally well shot.
I guess we could just continue like what Madam was just saying about integrity. I think it is all lost today. And
it's a horrible thought.
Maybe very less specific of it. And maybe we can just conclude that before when you say it was boring and stupid, it could probably be manipulated.
Well, I must tell you that I rarely like this, the past was golden and today it's not. I don't like this. But as you can make out in this also and read a bit more in detail, there was a lot of manipulation even then, and we don't know the details, and perhaps there are a lot of very, very good reviewers, or at least reviewers who are trying to do it as honest a job as possible. Yeah, so see, integrity is not something that is the monopoly of any era or any person or any time or something like that. To leave a comfortable gig like he did of Mumbai Mirror, I mean, does call for a little bit of this. Of course, he was grabbed immediately after that, but still, not by us.
We have to pay the rent mostly. Yeah, it was widely publicized. Probably the most famous I'm ever going to be for one day or 2 days.
You got your 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
But then they say it was Rajiv.
I have a question for Siddharth, coming back closer to the topic of discussion, which is what it means to cover Bollywood. Good reviewing is, also needs that kind of nuance and statements that back what you're saying. I don't think necessarily saying, I think this film is stupid and trite is good criticism. And while Patel is a very colorful character, and this might be something you've covered in the book, but I haven't read the whole book yet. What are your thoughts on the actual merit of his writing and the merit of his criticism? Do you think that was good journalism?
No, well, his film reviewing was very basic, to put it mildly. But again, immediately giving you a counter to that, it gives me an alternate view of what is talked about those films today and what was being talked even then. So that's, for me, that's, as a historian, that's very, very important. So while he might say that, Kagaz Ke Phool which incidentally I don't think is such a great film either. But if he says that, it's nothing so great, etc., it's a good antidote to looking at it from what the others may have said or what we look at it. So in that sense, it has got archival, historical, and a little bit of social value, cultural value to me. He was not a great cinema person. I don't think he understands the nuances of cinema. But as I said, to me it is still vital because it's an alternate view of what was being put around at that time. Now, if you have 3 or 4 other critics of the time, and I did read up on a few others, all of them saying fantastic, classic, etc., etc., then this comes in handy for me to give another perspective that way. Yeah. And
Avid Learning, I would like to thank our panelists, Siddharth, Raja, and Rahul. Thank you so much for your insights tonight. For all their support, I'd like to thank Sunavi and the team from Indus Publishing, as well as Daiva Chaya, who designed the book, and Rajiv Thakkar and the team from Studio X. Thank you for all your support. We look forward to continued collaboration. Just a note, Patel...